Let's make an expensive, cheap mead, or a cheap, expensive mead, however you want to look at it. But basically, somebody sent us some really awesome Hawaiian honey. And
we love getting gifts like this, but we also know that these are hard to get and they're quite pricey.
Right.
So we thought to ourselves, how could we utilize this honey in a means that would benefit you as a viewer?
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a basic mead using Kirkland wildflower honey. Why? Because this is just good stuff. We like it.
So basically, just use a neutral honey. Anything that you can get in your local area that is the most cost effective.
And I'm going to use 2.5 pounds of this particular honey.
So we weighed out our honey, and now it's time to add a few things.
We're going to hydrate our yeast just because I feel like it.
Today's yeast is what, Brian?
Lalvin 71 Beast.
Also known as Lalvin 71B-1122. I just like to call it the Beast because that's what it is.
For us in this particular environment, and that's a critical thing that maybe we don't stress enough, is that yeasts are going to yeast the way they want to yeast, and you have no control over that. So if you find a yeast that works really well in your environment, embrace that yeast, love that yeast, and say nice things to it.
And when you open the package,
whack your packet to make sure you get each and every one of those little yeasty beasties out, because static cleaning is a thing.
And that way they can all fulfill their destiny. I just hydrated the yeast. All that means is I put it in a little bit of water just to kind of bring them up to speed, get them moving a little bit.
Get them hydrated.
It's not necessary, but
they're dried out. They're in a state of suspended animation. So rehydrating them, putting them into water could activate them, bring them back to the alive state, the non-sleepy state, and they will let us know by creating a foam dome, or at the very least, a little bit of bubble activity on the surface of our water.
Exactly. Now, inside here, I'm going to add a little bit of fermento. And you can do this before or after. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use a ½ teaspoon. There's been a lot of talk about staggered additions and things like that. If you wanted to wait 24 hours and add this, you totally can. If you want to do a ½ teaspoon now and a ½ teaspoon a week, you totally can. I like to just keep it simple and get it all in there now because, you know, we make a lot of brews. I don't want to have to mess with it. We also used only 2.5 pounds of honey on purpose. That way, this isn't a super high gravity. It should be somewhere in like the 1.080-ish range.
And we did that because we know we want to add more honey, our expensive honey, after this base of generic honey has fermented.
Right. So this should be somewhere in like the 10%, 11% ABV range, and then we'll sweeten it with the other honey. But that's a little advanced for where we are right now. So let's just get some water in here and start mixing it up.
Speaking of water, our water is warm. We like to use
Blood
warm,
temperature,
not hot water when adding it to honey because it really helps mixing the honey and the water together.
Now, we're using a 1 gallon fermenter, and it says 1 gallon right about here. So that's about where we're going to end up filling too, but I got to remember I have yeast water to go into. So right now, I'm just going to put some water in.
And it's right about now that I recollect I did not locate our thumb saver bung.
Shame on you.
I know.
I'm only going to go about halfway because of the aforementioned thumb saver bung and the mixage that will follow while using it.
All right, so let me go locate that and sanitize it so Brian can get to shaking.
Okay, so she's got the thumb saver bung.
Our thumb saver bung is just a solid bung. It is a 6.5 or 6.5 size. It fits perfectly on our 1 gallon fermenter, and it allows Brian to hold it in place without hurting his thumb.
Yep, you know, because the little hole, you push your thumb in and it hurts after a while. It's a joke, people. It's just a joke. Don't worry. Don't read too much into it. But why am I doing this?
You're doing this so that way you can aerate our brew. At this point, without any alcohol being created, oxygen is important to be added into the mix. Why? Because the yeast that are very slowly waking up will need that oxygen in order to be fruitful and multiply.
And gotta mix the honey in.
Yes. Secondarily, you need to mix the honey and the water and everything else that you've added together thoroughly. So that way it's an even distribution. So when you take your gravity reading, it'll actually be accurate. Otherwise, it won't be.
Because we actually did a dump mead, which we called it that because all we did is dump everything in. We didn't aerate, we didn't take readings, and we didn't mix. And it still worked, and it came out great. It's actually, I really liked that mead. But the aeration helps to eliminate that rotten egg sulfur smell that some people have been complaining about. So it's kind of an important step. And you can probably never aerate too much at the startup, okay? Somebody reminded me that there was an article about how much aeration you should have, and it was like an insane amount of aeration. There's no way I'm even 10% of what they recommended. So it's just a help. And my rule of thumb on mixing is when you think you've mixed enough, go 2 more minutes because there's always a little bit that you missed.
Now, if you are brewing a larger volume rather than the 1 gallon that we typically do here, it might be beneficial for you to get what they call as the whip. It is an attachment for mixing that you can put onto a power drill, so that way you won't have to shake
it's a lot easier.
3 or 5 or who knows how many gallons. You can just use that electronic drill and boil it into oblivion.
But for small batches like this, it's not necessary. You can if you want to, but I don't think it's all that necessary. Plus, a little arm workout never hurt anybody. Okay, our yeast. It might not have been long enough, but they ain't doing nothing.
It's not time for them yet anyway, so we can let them do their thing, hopefully.
Mixing them up, waking them up. Hey, wake up.
Wake up.
Okay.
So we need more water.
Yeah, let's put some more water
in. And we also, at some point, need to take a pH reading to be sure.
But you don't want to take the pH until we add more water because that actually alters the pH reading. You got this? Look at that. Takes a very steady hand. Or 2. You can go pretty far because I'm just going to mix it again. And we only have half a cup of water to add, so you're good. Right there, sounds about right.
And now I mix more.
Yep. See that foam? Don't fear the foam. It's okay. It'll die down as it goes, and notice I'm mixing it differently now. It's already oxygenated a bit, so all I'd be doing is making more foam, which just makes it more difficult in the long term.
The only reason why the foam is a difficulty is that it gets in the way of a proper gravity reading, and
it can
also
push
up into the airlock and make a big mess. If that occurs during your fermentation process, then simply switch from an airlock to a blow-off tube method. We have a complete video on that. I'll make sure to link it both here and in the description below.
Okay, next I'm going to take a pH reading. Now, we used to not do this at all, and now we started doing it like all the time. And we found that the chance of stall has reduced
greatly
by a lot by just doing this very simple thing. We use the strips because they're easy, and I just put a drop or 2 on there. And that is super green.
We have also learned never to assume what the pH may be because more than likely you're wrong.
So this is reading very, very green. I'm going to guess that is 5 pH.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we needed a little acidic-y more.
A little knowledge about pH. We can be totally fine at 5 if we want to just let it go. Most yeast will work between 3.5 and 5.5, okay? Ideally, what we found is 4. 4 to 4.5 max. That's it. Now, something to remember, and this is a very minute possibility, but it is something to be aware of. Botulism spores can exist in honey, okay? And they will be active above 4.6 pH, where they cannot be active 4.6 or below. So that's kind of an important number. So that's kind of like my absolute cutoff. So that's why we're thinking of we're just going to add a little acid blend.
There's also another thing to take in consideration, and that is the fermentation process itself is an acidifying factor. So it will get more acidic than what it is right now, but how much? We don't know for sure. So erring on the safe side, we're going to add a little bit of acid blend.
Yep. However, I got my spoon wet. So can you rinse that off?
I can. And I'm going to rinse this off in turbos. The Red Book of Sanitization!
And everything that we've used here has been sanitized in that bucket. It's just a big bucket filled with star sand mixed to the manufacturer's suggestion. And everything has been sanitized. Anything that touches your brew should be sanitized, okay? That's really, really important. We don't make a big deal about it in the beginning, but we totally should. What?
This little finger wants to tell you to grab a piece of paper towel so that way we can dry this thoroughly so we won't get acid blend all stuck all over it.
All right, I will do that.
Thank you.
That little finger. I don't know why the little finger had to tell me something, but okay. And dry it really, really good before you stick it into your acid blend or, you know, into any dry powder because, oh my God, it just sticks. Molecularly dry is what you need. I don't know how you can do that because I've dried the heck out of things and they still stick.
Well, it's better than not drying it at all.
Yep. So this is exciting television, watching me stuff a paper towel into a measuring spoon.
All right, so how much acid blend are you going to add? A half teaspoon?
Well, it says, see, I always read this and I always go, I don't know why I read this. 1 teaspoon per gallon increases acidity by 0.1%. That means absolutely jack squat to me.
The reason being is that the pH range is not a straight line. It's kind of a wavy.
Yep.
Tiny
And we
wavy.
only need this to go down a little bit. I don't want to go down too much. So I'm actually going to put half of a half teaspoon. So this is
like
a
a
quarter
fourth?
teaspoon.
Okay.
Yeah. Just a little bit of acid blend in there.
All
And
right.
we're going to mix that through. By the way, if you hear any extraneous noises, our air conditioner's being serviced. It's actually
important.
running. It was off for a little
Maintain
while.
your
Starting
house.
to get warm.
It's very important.
Yeah. Especially if you're in Florida. AC is like a requirement. And I'm just going to roughly mix that through just to make sure that it's homogeneous throughout. And apparently homogeneous and homogeneous are both the same word, and either one is appropriate. So I'm going back to saying homogeneous. All right, so let me get out another pH strip here. And this is why we love this one, because it's just like a roll, and you just
Yep.
take out what you need. Did you clean this too?
Not since last time you took one.
just-
You want me to do another one?
Do another one, just to make sure there's no contamination.
All right. There you go.
All right, a couple of drops here. You really don't need much.
That
That
looks
changed
better.
it drastically.
Look at that.
Yep, now it's probably right at 4.0, 4.1, somewhere in that range.
Beautiful.
Perfect. Now, the reason we do that is because yeast actually seem to like certain pH ranges a little bit better. If it gets too acidic for them, which we know they still work well at 3.5, so even if this drops during fermentation, it should still be totally fine.
Pretty much most of the testing we do at this stage of fermentation is to make sure that our environment for our yeast is super good. So that way they will be happy and not be stressed, because a stressed yeast is a sad yeast and can possibly cause off flavors and or a stall.
Okay, I have a little bit of foam action with the yeast over here, so I'm just going to mix this up real good so that everybody gets up into the solution and get them off the sides and all that. They all must fulfill their destiny. And then dump that in. We may have overfilled slightly.
Nah, it's good.
We got greedy. Look at that, worked out. So right now our mead is completely assembled, but right now what I want to do is get an initial gravity reading so that we know what it started at, and I can see just how far off my initial numbers I really was. I'm thinking it was like 1.084-ish or something like that. Should be. Couple points either way, doesn't really matter. We're just looking to make sure that it's not super low or super high relative to what we wanted it to be, because then we did something wrong. 1.080. I'll take it. That's really, really close. We did add a little bit more water than I thought, so there we go. All right, this sample is going to go back in because, like we said, everything has been sanitized, so it's totally safe to do. Some people dump this out.
We are not some people.
Waste not, want not, I was brought up to believe. Okay, so now we're going to add the airlock.
It's probably not going to sit right because it never does. So we're going to use our rubber band trick.
And these are just broccoli bands. They came literally from broccoli from the store, and it works wonderfully well. You just kind of hook it on the handle and hook the other side over like that, and your airlock won't come out.
At this point, we're going to put this on a half baking sheet
Yeah,
that
we
has the
don't let-
edges. That way, in case that foam gets super active and pushes up into the airlock and creates a mess during the fermentation process,
It
the
doesn't make a
tray
mess.
will catch that mess rather than our kitchen floor.
Exactly. And we're going to let this ferment until we see very little airlock activity. And at that point, we'll be back to show you the next step. All right, so it's been 2 weeks on this, and you might notice we don't even have any gear out because look at that airlock. it's still fairly active.
Now, the airlock is one thing, but there's another thing. Let's take a closer look. All right, so you can probably see that little layer of bubbles at the very top, but what you can also probably see is all those tiny bubbles coming up the side, adding to that layer on the top. Those little bubbles that are traveling up the side at high speed are telling me, I don't think this is just degassing. I think it's still fermenting. So, because of that activity, there's really no point in taking a reading at this time.
Nope, we're going to put it back in the fermentation. See you in a week. Okay, it's been sitting for like 3 weeks. Why? Well, life gets in the way, and it was still going for quite a while.
Yeah, this was kind of like the Energizer Bunny. It just kept going.
So it started at 1.080, as you saw if you've been watching all along for the last, I don't know, however long the first part of this video was. And we normally, first thing we want to do is look to see if there's anything unfavorable in there, and there was nothing. There's no weird smells or anything, because you'd know already. Yeah, there's no weird smells. It's actually starting to clear. A little bit of gas in there, which is not unusual. I know it sounds like I'm just kind of glossing over all this, but these are the normal things that you see. If we saw something unusual, I would let you know. There's nothing here that's unusual at all so far. Everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. And it went to 0.998, which means it's most likely done. Now, just because we like to do these kind of things this way, we are going to put this sample back in. We're going to let this sit for another week just to make sure it's really done. Oh. As I like to do, though, I would like to just kind of give this a little swirl, degassing it a little bit. This is swirling, not mixing, okay? There's gases coming out of here, trust me, and that's why I didn't want to put the airlock on, because it would go nuts. But I'm also getting everything back up into suspension, giving it one last chance if it's going to ferment anymore.
I don't think you're going to get everything back.
See that foam? Look at that. Oh, it did.
No, it didn't.
I'll do it. I'm going to do it.
I had to point it out, right?
Yep, you had to point it out. You told me I can't do something. We had this conversation earlier.
I'll see you in a month or so.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I got 99% of it up into solution. So there we go. We just put the airlock back on. We hold them with rubber bands because they just never... We have so many different kinds of this shape of fermenter, and they're all like slightly different sized. Now, if anybody was curious, let me show you. Watch that airlock. Just instantly starts going. There's plenty of gas in there. Any oxygen that might have been introduced should get forced out, because two things. CO2 is heavier than oxygen. So right away, CO2 is going to sit below oxygen. Oxygen would be on top. And the liquid is more permeable to CO2 than it is to oxygen. So with all that CO2 in there, it's much less likely to get oxygen in. But
otherwise, we're hedging our bets.
Yes, and I have to put a date. 10/3/24.
You should probably put a line in between there, because that's what you typically do.
Yeah, I do it different every time.
He does, and then gets confused.
Yep. And this is my notes. It's going to go right back on here. And what are we going to do with this?
We're going to let it sit, and we'll see you in a week.
Okay, so when we last visited, it was 0.998, and that was like 3 weeks ago, because hurricanes, you know, they suck. We weren't even home. So I want to take another gravity reading just to make sure this is done, even though that sounds really weird to say because it was a 0.998.
Yeah, it's done.
It's done. We're just verifying. This is the verification process.
Trying to practice what we preach.
Yeah, it cleared beautifully.
It did. It really did.
It's a lovely color. Everything about this just... Oh, yeah. So that's awesome, because that gives us an awesome base to work from. And, you know, it's just Kirkland wildflower honey made a pretty basic mead. Still got some gas in there. That's a little surprising after all this time. I mean, I can say it's 0.997, but it's 0.998.
And after all that time, if it only went down...
1 point?
That's
0.001.
Yeah.
It's nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's done. We are going to end up pasteurizing this anyway.
Are we taking gravity readings after we back sweeten, or?
Probably. We tend to take a lot of readings.
Right.
So now what we're going to do, we were initially just going to add a good honey to this whole batch and be like, oh yeah, let's just see what that tastes like. And then I thought, you know, that sounds a little bit boring. So we can do better.
The main reason being, not only were we gifted one super fancy schmancy honey, but we were gifted to.
They're both from Hawaii. They're two different blossom honeys. I think it'd be really cool to compare them side by side. Not really to see which is better, just to see what's the main differences and is it detectable. Now, I know someone's going to say, why didn't you have a third one, a control that's sweetened with the Kirkland wildflower? Well, we could, except that's not really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say, can we make this average mead taste better than average? So we wouldn't do that by adding Kirkland wildflower honey. Anyway.
So there's another thing that we're going to need that we don't have right now.
And what's that?
A spoon. Because
Oh.
we need to taste these honeys that we've never tried before, because that's what we're trying to replicate in
Yeah,
this
but
mead.
first, don't we need to rack half of this off?
Sure.
Yeah. So we actually put some thought into this. What we're going to do is just rack about half of this gallon into our pitcher, and then we're going to mix that and then put it into a separate container and then do the same for the other side. So, just going to use an auto siphon just like always. I'm trying really hard to not disturb the lees at all this time because I have to do this twice, and that's a little scary. We're just going to eyeball about half a gallon, maybe a little bit less than half a gallon because we are going to sweeten this. 64 ounces would be half a gallon. So when we get close to that, I'm going to just start pulling out. The comment section is going to go crazy with that one. Okay, so we have our half gallon. Now she's right. We need a spoon. Let me go get a spoon. So which one do you want to do first? How about the one we can pronounce?
Macadamia nut.
There's one over there that I Willy Wacky or
No,
something.
I think it's Wailiki.
Wailiki.
I know.
Wailiki.
I know each vowel is pronounced in the Hawaiian language, so I'm trying. Waileiki.
Sure. Okay. This smells amazing. I'll take from the bottom, you take from the top.
It just
Or however you want to do
doesn't
it.
even matter.
Ooh. Yeah. I mean, it's honey, okay? But there's undertones of like the macadamia nut. I get a little bit of the nuttiness of it.
There's
Definitely
a little
nice
nutty
floral.
and a little buttery.
Yeah. Does have a little bit of a buttery thing going on.
Yeah.
I like it. I think it's good.
It's lovely.
Okay. So now,
So it's those flavor notes that we want to have in our mead.
we need to decide how much we're going to add.
We're going to do it like we always do, back sweetening, a little bit at a time.
Okay.
We have our base gravity reading. So when we get to the flavor profile we like, we'll take another gravity reading and indicate that, because the way we do it, and because of the volumes are so wonky, saying, oh, we added half a pound isn't going to do you any good.
Right.
If we say we added this much specific gravity points, that's something that you can measure regardless of what volume you're working with.
Let me get a tasting glass. Okay, so the way we do it is we always just add a bit, mix it up, add a bit more. It's a little tricky because we're working with small volumes here, and
You probably don't need the spoon, so
yeah, I do.
Okay.
To do that.
all right.
That's why I needed a spoon,
Okay.
to keep it from overflowing,
All right.
because I saw that coming.
Okay.
Good times. Now I just want to mix it up. Did I drip?
It's going to. So I must sacrifice myself.
Yeah, you gave up so much for that. And yeah, we just add some, taste it, add a little bit more, taste it. That's the whole point of this exercise too, is we want to flavor it with that honey, but we don't want to overpower it either. We don't want it to be just super sweet and all that kind of thing. But who knows, maybe more sweet is better. Maybe drier is better for this one. We don't know yet.
Well, the premise of this whole experiment is, can you take a lesser expensive honey, use it as a base to create a more expensive profile
Right.
by simply back sweetening with the expensive honey?
Yes. But you still don't want to overdo it.
Now, I know somebody says, well, you should have compared it to a control where you fermented with expensive honey. Sure. If you want to go to Hawaii and get us 3 pounds worth of macadamia nut.
We could have done that too, sure. But I like to think that we have experienced enough palates to be able to tell the difference at this point. So I think we're good. What? You were trying to get somebody to go to Hawaii and buy us more honey. I know. I'm trying to be nice. There's a switch.
Did we mention the person who got this?
We didn't. There was some confusion because the label and the invoice had two different names. So we think it's from Jody Stevens. If it's not from Jody Stevens, and instead Jody Stevens is the actual supplier rather than the person that purchased it, we apologize. That was lost in translation in all the paperwork that came with this. All right. Smells like mead. I did not add much, so it's probably not going to change it much at all. We didn't even taste the mead before. We tasted the honey, but not the mead.
It needs more. I actually do wash and sanitize my hands between this, so those of you who are cringing, you're cringing unnecessarily, but thank you nonetheless.
So the mead itself, the way we just tasted it, it's a little acidic. We did add acid blend to this because I think the pH was just on the low side. It was 4.0 after adding acid blend. We used Kirkland Wildflower Honey, 71B, and Fermentation. Other than that, there's really nothing in here. It tastes a little acidic to me. That was a little hot. Not horrible, just a little hot. Now, it is possible that the temperature fluctuations in our house affected the fermentation of it,
Sure.
but we tested this before we left.
Right.
So this was done. It sat at a warmer temperature for a week.
But that shouldn't happen.
Shouldn't make that much change. So this may require more sweetening than we might think, just because of that, to kind of overcome some of those flavors. All right, so after the second edition of honey, time for another taste. You know, it's all about tasting. That's why you brew the stuff, right? I mean, if you don't want to taste it, why are you making it? I mean, don't take that wrong. I know a lot of people make it for others who don't, and they don't drink themselves, and that's totally cool too. I'm just being facetious. That's actually really nice. I'm getting a little bit of the macadamia coming through. It's just sweet. It's not overly sweet. What do you think?
I'd take another one for science.
And that looks to be, I mean, there's 47 ounces in the whole jar. We didn't even use a fourth of that, so probably used like 12
I
ounces.
gave you a little bit in case you wanted a little bit more. I think that's really nice. I feel like the macadamia nut honey is coming through lovely.
It definitely added to it.
And the acidity, I think, actually works well with this particular.
Well, the acidity seems to have gone down. Sweetness took the acidity down a touch.
Yeah.
But the first taste to this taste, dramatically different. Like completely different mead.
Yeah.
Nothing the same at all.
Yeah. The first taste, I was kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, are we sure we want to do this? Okay, so we're going to rack this into a
No,
half
we're
gallon.
not.
Oh,
We're going to take a gravity reading.
right. All right. You might be wondering, why are you taking another reading? Well, that way we can tell you what it ended at. And we just like to have records of this kind of thing.
It also indicates how much sugars, honey,
that's what I mean.
we added.
Ended
We
at.
talked about already.
Ended up at, I guess, because it ended at 998. Wow, we sweetened that quite a bit. Way more than I would have thought. We turned it into a dessert mead. 1042, 1.042. Wow, that's a lot.
Sure.
Way more than I expected.
All right.
Macadamia.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because you saw, we tasted it until we liked it. I would not consider this to be overly sweet. Remember I said, this is just sweet. I didn't think it was all that sweet yet. That's crazy.
All right. So that, well, you can put it in there, but you're going to put it in the vessel now.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to siphon from here into the vessel. Be back in a minute.
All right. Now it's time to taste this honey. W-I-L-E-L-A-I-K-I. Blossom.
Yep. Wikiwachi. Very different. Kind of flowery, touch of earthiness. I almost get like raspberry. Yeah, berry, which I don't know what, it looks like little tomatoes on a vine, so I don't know what it is. But
It's got almost that tart. I think that's what's making him think berry.
so it's all gone from the inside of the pitcher, but it's still in the spattle. Mixing honey, most awesome pastime ever. I think I might have got this in one shot. Just looking at the amount that's left in the jar. We'll find out in a second. It's very messy when you're only using a little bit of the honey in a jar. Okay, so our tasting glass has been rinsed out.
So we're looking for those floral, fruity notes to come through.
Exactly. And if it doesn't, then we add a little bit more honey. Needs a little more.
It needs more.
There's an odd note in that mead.
Yep.
Like the bitter note that I don't like. It's coming through a little stronger than usual.
I sanitized everything, including myself.
She jumped in the sanitizer fluid. I don't recommend that, especially for pets. It's very bad for pets.
This isn't a joke. Don't let your animals drink from your sanitizer because it can kill them.
Yep.
So
We know somebody that
please be
happens.
very careful with that.
I probably throw away hours of footage of us mixing stuff. when I do
Mixing
the
and
editing.
pouring.
Mixing and pouring and racking.
It's the mixing, pouring, and racking show. Dun,
Yeah.
dun.
I know somebody's going to say, oh, you should put all that together and make a video just that. No.
No.
No. It would bore me. I can't imagine what it would do to other people. No. It is really interesting, though, how different these two honeys taste.
The tasting notes on this is supposed to be sweet, spicy.
You know, I wanted to say there was some sort of a spicy thing to it, but it didn't come through strong. I detected something.
Getting a tartness, which might be construed as spiced because of that little punch. It's punchy.
I think it's nice. We good? Do you think we need more?
I think it's good.
Okay. Let me get our reading. Probably just as sweet, if not sweeter than the other one. Which I think that's kind of the downside. If you're trying to get those notes to come through, you may actually have to add a lot more to it. So like if you try to do a dry one, not going to happen.
Yeah. Using this much honey for a half gallon versus...
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper than making the whole... Because we would have needed this plus probably another half of this in order to achieve the same thing, making a full gallon. 1.050. I can't spell this.
It's also known as Christmas berry.
We'll call it Christmas berry because that's easier to say. All right, so just like before, we're going to put this into the other half-gallon container that we have. We're also going to pasteurize both of those because they have a chance at re-fermentation because this is nowhere near what that yeast is capable of doing. I can give you a rough idea of where we're at for ABV. Let's see. We started at 1.080. We went to 0.998. The extra honey that we added for sweetening does not count towards ABV, okay? It diluted it ever so slightly. Like in this one, it actually diluted it by about an ounce or two, like maybe 2 ounces. So not much, but anyway, times 135 gives us 11% ABV, which means it's anywhere from like 10 to 12. Okay, but like I said, this will go into the other container. We're going to pasteurize both of them and let them sit for about a week.
I will link our full pasteurization process in the description below if you are unfamiliar with it, so that way you know what we're doing.
Right, and let me just give you in the nutshell. We're going to take these containers, put them into a pot of water with a sous vide or an immersion circulator to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Celsius will be right here. Bring that internal temperature in that bottle up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for 22 minutes. After that, we take them out of the liquid, let them come to room temperature, let them sit for about a week, and that's when we'll be back to give you our actual tasting notes. Okay, so these have sat for a week after pasteurization, and as you can tell, they look very different, and that's just from the back-sweetening. Now, we back-sweeten these pretty heavily, though. These are like 1.040 and 1.050.
Right, and our honeys, I think, are right over there, and if I recall correctly, they were different colors to start off with.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So
that's where
it makes sense, but it just goes to show how different things can actually be. And the whole point of this test, it might sound a little bit silly to some people, but it's to not have to use 3 to 4 pounds of an expensive honey and still make a fancy tasting mead. I mean, obviously it can be done. I was just curious how much it takes and if it can be done easily. We're just going to rinse that off in turbos. And it's mostly because a few people have asked, like, can I use a cheap honey and then sweeten with an expensive honey later. Does that make a difference? Well, the difference is it's not going to have the full richness of that expensive honey, but it also doesn't have the price tag.
Now, we didn't do a control where we fully fermented the expensive honey because the honey is expensive.
But also, we didn't use crap honey. Like, we used real honey. It was Kirkland Wildflowers, I recall.
Yep.
So it's a pretty decent, very inexpensive honey. Now, if you start using like corn syrup type stuff, yeah, you're probably not going to be able to get a decent result out of that, I would think.
Yeah. So let's get to tasting.
Right.
I have the
Wailalaihi blossom. I don't know how to say it still. Wiki-waki.
Christmas berry.
Yeah. Christmas berry blossom. There you go. And I have the macadamia nut blossom.
It smells so nice.
This one smells okay. Getting a little bit of youth on it. But in the flavor, wow, such a unique flavor profile.
Now, we did back sweeten these pretty far.
Yeah.
And that would be my big takeaway from this particular route.
Because you might need to.
Is that you might have to back sweeten more than normal to get those notes from the expensive honey in there.
Oh, that one's kind of almost a little spicy. Kind of, it's like a floral spicy. This one's a little more nutty and earthy. Mm-hmm. They're both really good, very different. Mm-hmm. So that right there proves you can back sweeten. I mean, obviously, if you add enough, you're going to taste it. We did add a significant amount.
Yeah. Yeah.
We only made half gallons. I would say we had to have added like a quarter pound of honey to each in order to have where we're at.
So obviously, if your intent was to have a dry mead, this isn't going to work.
No. For a dry mead, you'd actually have to use the honey.
Right.
But that in itself means you're using a little bit less honey too, and you could make it more like 2 pounds or 1.5 pounds instead of going 3 pounds for a typical mead. So there's a lot of ways to go with that.
So the basis of our test was, is this something that could be done with minimal amounts of the expensive honey and still have a great tasting mead? I would say
absolutely.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, and you can sweeten this less than we did too. We just sweetened it to our taste, which is, sometimes we like sweet mead. There's nothing wrong with that. I have had just straight traditionals, though. We both had straight traditionals made from this honey. These taste vastly different.
Right. And
they
by
taste
this
so
honey,
different
he
from
means
each other.
the base honey, not the
Yeah,
expensive
the base
honey.
Kirkland Wildflower.
Yeah.
Even sweetened almost this much.
Yeah. These have a richness.
Much more
and
exotic
a depth.
flavors,
Yeah.
more complexity. And that's, I think, what the exotic honeys add is extra complexity to it. More layers of flavor. It was right in front of my face. More layers of flavor that you don't get with just a standard honey. Like a regular wildflower is going to be good, but these bump it up a notch. So we can't say definitively, is this as good as if we had fermented the original honey, like those two honeys, the exotic honeys, and back sweetened with them. But we couldn't actually do that and do what we did. So that's the other side to it too. We didn't have enough to be able to do that. But I think it's enough to say, yeah, this makes a really nice product.
Yeah.
It really does. Either one of these would be a great tasting mead. Really, really nice. And this way, if you have 3 pounds of this kind of honey, we sweeten with like a quarter? So, I mean, wow, that's like 6 gallons worth that you can make.
Yeah.
And if that honey is something like $50 or $60 a pound, now you're spreading that over 6 gallons versus 1 gallon.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's such a huge difference.
So more bang for your buck, and you still get that rich depthness. Is that a word?
Depth. Just depth.
Just depth. You
were thinking deepness and depth at the same time.
I think I was trying to combine them.
Yeah.
I do that a lot. Anyway, back to my original statement, you can still create a mead with that great rich flavor, but for more bang for your buck.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the end of this test. It was very, very simple. Just wanted to show that. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.